Hello everyone, this is Isaac White from the Crockett Tavern Museum here in Morristown, Tennessee, and I wish to sincerely apologize about this late upload. The simple fact of the matter is that I legitimately have been so busy that this past week I have got my dates all mixed up, and I thought yesterday was Thursday and I was supposed to be uploading today. Well, obviously it turns out I'm going to be, but I thought that today was going to be Friday, so I sincerely apologize about that. Trust me, I was horrified when I got home and I looked at the calendar and realized what date it was. And, well, at that point it was too late to do anything. So again, I hope you will excuse me for that lapse in judgment. But nonetheless, we're going to keep pressing on. And to do that, we are going to start looking into the history of some of the most cruel cutthroats of the 18th and 19th century, with one exception. However, you'll find out about him and his history once we come to it. But in order to find that out, you'll have to stay tuned now, won't you? But nonetheless, we are going to kind of ease ourselves into the history of some of this madcap cast of characters. And to do that, we are going to take a look into the history of a man who I have deemed fit to nickname the Evil Excavator, Michel Formant. Michel Formant was born in France in 1690. It was said that from a very early age he seemed to be possessed of a remarkable intellect, one which would see him quickly rise through the ranks of academia to the extent of graduating from the College Royal in 1720. In 1728 he was sent by King Louis XV on an expedition to Constantinople in Greece. Jean-Paul Bignon, the king's librarian, sent further instructions which stated that Formant was going to be tasked with collecting ancient Byzantine manuscripts and works, as well as Grecian works, in order to bring them back so they could be not only further preserved, but also studied. Now, of course, this whole trip was going to be funded by none other than the Comte de Maurepas, which is something that you'll need to bear in mind, because Formant, throughout his expeditions into those wild lands, would stay in frequent contact with the Count, or the Comte. We see that his initial expedition into Constantinople was less than successful. In fact, he writes to the Comte de Maurepas that he had much difficulty in trying to find, much less procure, any Byzantine-type artifacts or manuscripts, even though he had gone to the extent of visiting and studying what he could find at monastic libraries. And so, feeling that that particular venture was a failure, he instead shifted his focus to what remained of ancient Greece. It was there in Greece in 1730 that he ended up paying his workers for 1,200 man-hours of labor in order to excavate, if you will, some of these ancient Grecian sites. Now, Formant had an interesting interpretation of what it meant to excavate or to be an archaeologist, because we see that instead of trying to slowly but surely carefully remove the dirt away layer by layer, like people would now and people did even back then, well, he decides to just go ahead and tear everything down. Yep, that was it. Dismantle it stone by stone, brick by brick, until he found what he wanted. And we're going to talk about what he did with what he found here in just a few moments' time. We see that in a letter to the Comte de Maurepas that he first and foremost states, "For more a month, although ill, I am working with 30 laborers for the complete destruction of Sparta. Hardly a day goes by without finding something, and some days have produced as many as 20 inscriptions. If I could do at Tegea, Antigonia, Nemea, and 1 or 2 other cities what I have done at Hermione, Troezen, and Sparta, it wouldn't be necessary to send anyone here. There would be nothing left. I have not been able to knock down the remains of the former places because of the plague, without which they would be totally destroyed. For lack of books, these destructions shall be the only way to make illustrious a voyage which has caused such a stir." So literally, it's right here in his own letters to the Comte that he was dismantling these ancient cities, and what he did with the manuscripts and these ancient letter stones was absolutely deplorable. He would go through and actually study them and try to figure out what it was saying. He would translate it, and then he would turn right around and just mar the stone, rendering it illegible for further use. But we also see further in the same letter, as a matter of fact, to the Comte, that he says, "Speaking frankly, I am astonished at this expedition. I have read nowhere that since the restoration of literature, no one has had the idea of turning whole cities upside down to find these marbles, which are the only irreproachable evidence of antiquity, the only things capable of shedding light on the dark corners of history, of the administration and religion of ancient peoples. Only in this manner can one contribute usefully to science." Well, he also goes on to state, "So convinced am I that Sparta is the fifth city of Moria I have destroyed. Hermione and Troezen have had the same fate. I have not spared Origo, Phalacia, and some others. I am currently working to dismantle the temple of Amyclean Apollo down to the foundation stone. Every day one finds things you will be pleased to see. I would destroy others with the same ease if I were left to do so." I tell you, that guy's an absolute joke for an archaeologist. But interestingly, he's not wrong, because in fact it was recorded that just from Sparta alone, there were 1,200 letter stones, or stones with inscriptions, that he had got a hold of. He translated them, and then he turns right around and mars them to the point of making them illegible, similar to some of the other places and the stones of which I've told you about before. But fortunately, before Formon could continue his wreaking havoc across the Peloponnesian area, he was called back to France before he could actually make his next intended journey to Olympia, where Mount Olympus is. Now, yes, that is a real location. It's not just the fictitious home of the Greek gods. But nonetheless, I shudder to think of what could have possibly happened had Formon actually made it as far as Olympia. But nonetheless, we see that when Formon does in fact get back to France, he writes only a short report of his journey. And of course it was greeted with a warm reception, and he was treated with much pomp and circumstance. In fact, he even became elected as board members for certain academical institutions, not only in France, but also in the United Kingdom. Fortunately, however, this would not continue to last, and we see that in 1746, Michel Formon, the Evil Excavator, passed away. Now, as I'm sure you could imagine, when Formon passed away, he left kind of a controversial legacy. In fact, many of his contemporaries, they were appalled by what he had done, and we see that this remains the same, even still to this day. But only a handful of years after he had done what he did down in Greece, we see that certain people who had come to visit the ancient ruins of Sparta and Amyclea and Nemea, so on and so forth, they were shocked. They were horrified to see the destruction that he had wrought upon these venerated places. And it was so bad to the point that certain scholars from this point, they started to publicly denounce Michel Formon and his works. Edward Dodwell, an Irish scholar, actually went so far as to state that anything of his works is basically nothing more than a work of fiction. And that's not too far from the truth, because Auguste Bach, another scholar, ended up actually studying what Michel had translated, and he said it's pretty much all a forgery. And so gradually, in the same way, which is ironic, the same way that Michel Formon tended to tear these cities down piece by piece, well, so was his legacy torn down piece by piece. And it got to the point to where, at this point, years after he has passed away, his work basically becomes irrelevant. It falls off to the wayside. He becomes little more than a cautionary tale to archaeologists as to what to do and not to do. And that's pretty much it. Overall, his work was disproven, and he basically was considered irrelevant to the field of archaeological sciences. So I can say thoroughly that I think that whatever these scholars said of Michel Formon, whether it be while he was alive or shortly after, I don't think the verdict is too harsh. I mean, it's hard to wrap my mind around someone going around and doing that because, well, I'll put it to you like this. I've been reenacting since the 4th grade, and my reenactments have led me to a point where I used to actually expand and do world history living histories, including that of the ancient Spartans. So suffice it to say, I've made my livelihood off of preserving and maintaining history and interpreting it as faithfully as I can. And when I came across this man and began to read his works, suffice it to say, my blood boiled. And all I could think was, thank God that he wasn't allowed to go any further. But what do you folks think? Do you think that Michel Formant is worthy of all these criticisms, or do you think that maybe he was just ignorant for the time and proceeded about it in a wrong manner, in a relatively innocent type of way? I want to hear your comments and your opinions on that. As for me, I think the man is an absolute heel. He's a joke to the archaeological and historical world, and that is why, although I'm sure Michel Formant would not care for this, not only others of his time called him different controversial names, but that is why I have decided it fitting to give him the nickname the Evil Excavator. What do you think? Well, folks, this concludes today's video, and again, I want to apologize for the late upload. However, we'll get back on track for next week. But with that being said, I want to thank you for taking your time out of your day to come and watch our video. And as always, we want to thank you for your support on Facebook and YouTube. It is greatly appreciated. And if you wish to support us, feel free to come on out to the Crockett Tavern Museum. Our hours of operation are from Tuesday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. And, of course, we charge a small admissions fee. It's $5 for adults, $4.50 for seniors and veterans, and $1 for children ages 5 through 18. Also, if you would like to come out and see some of our special events that we have planned, then please stay in touch with us on Facebook and YouTube to stay updated about those upcoming events. But I've already taken enough time out of your day, and so I'm going to go ahead and get out of your hair. With that being said, this is Isaac White from the Crockett Tavern Museum, signing off for now, saying goodbye and God bless.